The first sound I heard every morning was the song of the river. Long before the sun climbed above the tall acacia trees, the water would rush gently over smooth stones. Birds gathered along its banks, fishermen pushed their wooden boats into the current, and women filled their clay pots with cool, clear water. The river was more than a stream flowing through our village. It was the heart that kept us alive. My name is Kofi, and I had lived beside that river since the day I was born. Every part of our lives depended on it. Our crops drank from it. Our children learned to swim in it. Our elders told stories beside it. Even our prayers began and ended with gratitude for its endless gift. People often said that as long as the river flowed, hope would never leave our village. I believed those words with all my heart. Each morning, I helped my mother carry water before walking to our small farm. My father had died when I was still a child, so I worked hard to care for my family. The work was never easy, but I never complained. Whenever someone needed help repairing a roof, carrying heavy baskets, or gathering firewood, I offered my hands without expecting anything in return. Some people laughed because I asked too many questions. Why does the river never dry? I would ask, who first built the sacred stone by the riverbank? What happened before our grandparents were born? The elders usually smiled but rarely answered. Instead, they would simply tell me that some mysteries belonged to the ancestors. Still, my curiosity never faded. That week, the entire village was filled with excitement. The Day of Gratitude was only one sunrise away. It was our biggest celebration of the year. Families cleaned their homes until every doorway shined. Children practiced songs they would sing beside the river. Women prepared colorful cloth and decorated baskets with flowers. Hunters returned from the forest carrying gifts for the feast, while fishermen promised the largest catch anyone had seen in years. Laughter echoed through every path in the village. Even the oldest elders smiled as they watched everyone prepare. "The river has blessed us again," Chief Jabri proudly announced during the evening gathering. "Tomorrow, we thank the ancestors for another year of life." Everyone cheered. As the sky turned orange, I walked alone to the riverbank. The water reflected the colors of the sunset like a giant mirror. Small fish jumped above the surface before disappearing beneath the gentle waves. I knelt beside the water and touched it with my fingers. It felt colder than usual. For a brief moment, I frowned. Something felt different. The birds that usually sang near the reeds had gone strangely quiet. The wind stopped blowing. Even the frogs that filled every evening with their loud voices were silent. I looked across the water, trying to understand why my heart suddenly felt uneasy. After several long moments, I shook my head. Perhaps I was only tired. I returned home, unaware that everything I loved was about to change forever. Before sunrise the next morning, loud screams shattered the peaceful silence. I rushed outside. People were running toward the river. Fear spread across every face. What happened? Why is everyone shouting? Without waiting for answers, I ran as fast as I could. When I reached the riverbank, my legs froze beneath me. I could not breathe. I could not speak. The river was gone. The wide, powerful current that had flowed through our village for generations had completely disappeared. The riverbed stretched before us, dry and cracked beneath the rising sun. Hundreds of fish lay trapped in the mud, flipping helplessly as they struggled for life. Wooden fishing boats rested awkwardly on bare earth instead of floating on water. Children began crying. Women dropped their clay pots. Men stared in complete disbelief. "This cannot be real," someone whispered. My eyes searched in every direction. There wasn't a single stream. Not even a small trickle remained. As the morning grew hotter, more terrible news arrived. The wells are drying. There is barely any water left. Our animals refused to drink. Panic swept through the village like a wildfire. Families rushed to save whatever little water they still had. Arguments broke out. Fear replaced yesterday's laughter. The village elders slowly stepped forward. Their faces were pale. Their hands trembled. The oldest among them raised his walking stick toward the empty riverbed. His voice shook as he spoke words that chilled every soul standing there. "The ancestors are angry." A deep silence followed. Then another elder whispered something I had only heard in bedtime stories. "The old prophecy." Several people gasped. Others covered their mouths in horror. The day the river refuses to flow has finally come. No one moved. No one spoke. Together, the entire village stood frozen, staring at the lifeless riverbed, wondering if this was the beginning of the end. The silence beside the empty river did not last long. Soon, frightened voices filled the air. Men argued with one another. Mothers held their children close. Elderly villagers shook their heads as if they were watching a nightmare come true. I stood at the edge of the dry riverbed, unable to take my eyes off the cracked earth. Just yesterday, water had rushed through this place with strength and life. Now it looked like a wound across the heart of our village. Chief Jabri stepped forward and raised both hands. "Everyone," he called in a firm voice, "return to the council tree. We must understand what has happened before fear tears us apart." One by one, the villagers followed him. No one smiled. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the children, who usually chased one another through the dusty paths, walked quietly beside their parents. Under the great baobab tree, the elders sat in a wide circle. Their faces were heavy with worry. They had guided our village through floods, sickness, and famine, but I had never seen fear in their eyes before. Chief Jabri looked at each elder before speaking. "Our river has never failed us," he said. "If the ancestors have sent us a warning, we must understand it." For several moments, no one answered. Then, from the back of the gathering, a frail old man slowly stood. His name was Baba Omari. He was the oldest storyteller in the village. His white hair rested on his shoulders, and his walking stick looked almost as ancient as he was. Every child had grown up listening to his stories about brave hunters, wise kings, and the spirits of the land. Today, however, there was no joy in his eyes. "I prayed I would never live to see this day," he said quietly. The crowd became completely silent. Baba Omari took a slow breath before continuing. "My grandfather told me of an old prophecy, one that our elders stopped speaking about many generations ago." A chill ran through my body. The old man looked toward the empty river before speaking the words that made every face turn pale. "The river shall refuse to flow when the village buries a truth too heavy for the earth to carry." A frightened murmur spread through the crowd. "The waters will turn away from those who protect lies. Only when the hidden truth is brought into the light will life return to the land." His words settled over us like a dark cloud. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone shouted from the crowd, "Someone has cursed us." Another man pointed toward a neighboring family. "They have always practiced strange traditions." "We have done nothing," the family cried. An older woman stepped forward, her eyes burning with anger. "What about your family? Your grandfather stole land from mine." The man shouted back, "That happened before either of us was born." It still brought shame. Voices grew louder. Years of old pain suddenly returned. Families who had greeted one another with smiles only yesterday now glared across the gathering. Old rivalries rose from the past like smoke from a forgotten fire. I had never seen our village divided like this. Chief Jabri struck his staff against the ground. "Enough," he thundered. His voice silenced the crowd once more. "We will not destroy ourselves with accusations." He looked tired, older than I had ever seen him. Near the edge of the gathering stood Mama Zola, a widow who had lost her husband during a terrible storm many years before. She held her young grandson close as tears filled her eyes. "What if this is punishment?" she whispered. "How will our children survive without water?" No one answered her. Not far away stood Bako, the richest trader in the village. Unlike everyone else, his face showed little emotion. His arms remained folded as he quietly watched every argument. When people looked at him, he simply said, "Fear makes people imagine things. Rivers do not disappear because of stories." Yet something about his calm expression felt strange to me. He seemed less surprised than everyone else. I couldn't explain why, but it made me uneasy. As the meeting ended, people returned to their homes with heavy hearts. I wandered toward our fields. What I saw there filled me with fresh fear. Only a single day had passed, yet the green leaves were already beginning to curl beneath the hot sun. The rich soil looked dry. The young crops that had promised a good harvest now leaned weakly toward the ground. Above me, large flocks of birds circled once before flying away from the village. They did not return. That evening, another frightening report spread through the community. The cattle refused to drink. Our goats won't go near the wells. The chickens have stopped laying eggs. Every hour seemed to bring another warning. It was as if nature itself had decided to abandon us. As darkness covered the village, I found myself unable to sleep. Instead, I walked toward the edge of the forest, hoping the quiet would calm my restless mind. That was when I noticed someone standing beside an old baobab tree. It was Nia, the village healer. She was known for her knowledge of herbs, roots, and ancient traditions. Some believed she could hear things carried by the wind. Others simply respected her wisdom. She watched me before speaking. "You ask too many questions, Kofi." I managed a weak smile. "And you always seem to know when I'm looking for answers." She stepped closer. "The river is not your enemy." I frowned. "Then why has it left us?" She looked toward the dark village behind us. The river did not leave. Her voice became almost a whisper. "It is waiting." "For what?" She studied my face for a long moment before answering. "The truth." I stared at her in confusion. "What truth?" Nia slowly lifted one hand and pointed, not toward the empty river, but toward the sleeping village. "The answer you seek is not buried beneath the riverbed." She paused, her eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "It is buried inside the village itself." Her words echoed in my mind long after she disappeared into the darkness, leaving me with a question that would change everything. I barely slept after my meeting with Nia. Her final words repeated in my mind over and over. The answer is buried inside the village itself. At first light, I stood outside my family's hut and looked toward the empty river. The dry riverbed stretched across the land like a scar that refused to heal. The village no longer sounded the same. There were no cheerful songs, no laughter, no fishermen preparing their boats. Instead, I heard worried whispers, crying children, and the restless sounds of hungry animals. I knew I could not wait for someone else to find the truth. If the river had stopped because of a secret, then someone had hidden that secret very well. And I intended to find it. Instead of going to the fields, I began walking toward the oldest part of the village. Few people visited that place anymore. Many of the huts there had been abandoned years before. Their straw roofs had fallen apart, and vines covered the cracked mud walls. The narrow paths were buried beneath weeds, making it seem as if time itself had forgotten them. As I walked through the silent ruins, I wondered who had once lived there. Children had probably laughed in these homes. Families had likely shared meals beside small fires. Now only dust remained. One broken doorway caught my attention. Inside, the hut was almost empty except for a broken clay pot and a wooden stool covered in dirt. Something scratched into the wall stopped me. It was a strange symbol. A circle crossed by 3 flowing lines. I had never seen it before. Curious, I brushed away the dust with my hand. The carving looked old, very old. Someone had carefully hidden it beneath layers of mud long ago. Why would anyone hide a symbol inside their own home? The question stayed with me as I continued deeper into the forgotten part of the village. By midday, I reached the sacred grove. The elders always told children not to wander there alone. Ancient stone pillars stood among giant trees, their surfaces worn smooth by countless years of wind and rain. It was one of the oldest places in our village, built long before anyone alive today had been born. As I stepped closer, my heart began to race. The very same symbol was carved into one of the stones. The circle, the 3 flowing lines. Only this carving was much larger. I touched the cold stone. Someone had tried to chip away parts of the symbol, but enough remained for me to recognize it. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had erased these markings on purpose. As I searched around the grove, I noticed loose stones piled behind an old shrine. When I moved them aside, something wrapped in faded animal skin slid onto the ground. It was a small journal. Its leather cover had cracked with age, and many pages had turned yellow. Carefully, I opened it. The handwriting was uneven, but still readable. The first pages described ordinary village life from many years ago. Harvests, festivals, births, rainfall. But several pages later, the tone changed. The writer spoke of growing fear, of meetings held in secret, of families disappearing without explanation. One sentence made my hands tremble. Truth was sold for gold, and innocent blood watered the soil. I read the line again. Then again. The next pages were damaged. but enough remained to understand the terrible story. The writer believed several innocent families had been accused of crimes they never committed. After they disappeared, their farms, cattle, and land were given to powerful people. No names were written. Only one warning appeared beneath the final paragraph. Asterisk, those who profit from lies will fear the truth forever. Asterisk. I slowly closed the journal. My heart pounded inside my chest. Everything I had been taught suddenly felt uncertain. Growing up, we had always been told our village was built on honesty, unity, and justice. But what if that history had been changed? What if the stories we celebrated every year were only half the truth? As I left the sacred grove, I looked back once more at the ancient stones. Someone had worked very hard to erase the past, but they had not erased all of it. When I returned toward the center of the village, I found the situation growing worse. Children sat beneath trees with dry lips and tired eyes. Several mothers searched desperately for enough water to fill a single cooking pot. The village well had become nothing more than damp mud. People stood around it in silence, hoping water would somehow return. It never did. The fields looked weaker than they had the day before. Green leaves had turned yellow. Young plants bent toward the ground as if they no longer had the strength to stand. Even the wind carried dust instead of the fresh scent of the river. That afternoon, a group of men returned from a neighboring village. Their shoulders hung low. They refused to help, one of them said quietly. They said if they share their water with us, their own children will suffer. Another man kicked the dry ground in frustration. They closed their gates before we even finished asking. The news spread quickly. Hope began disappearing from people's faces. Some blamed the ancestors. Others blamed curses. A few blamed one another. Fear was slowly becoming desperation. That evening, I watched two brothers argue over a small bucket of muddy water. Their wives pulled them apart before the fight turned violent. I had never imagined seeing neighbors treat each other like enemies. As darkness settled over the village, I returned home and opened the journal once more. This time, I noticed something I had missed before. Folded between two pages was a small piece of cloth. Inside it rested a rough charcoal drawing. It showed several elders standing together beneath the great baobab tree. One figure had been marked with a dark circle. Beneath the drawing were only 6 words. Asterisk, they knew, and chose silence instead. Asterisk. A cold shiver ran through my body. I remembered the fear in Chief Jabbery's eyes. I remembered the calm face of the wealthy trader. I remembered how quickly the elders had tried to control the frightened crowd. Until that moment, I believed our leaders were simply confused. Now I wasn't so sure. As I carefully tucked the journal beneath my shirt, one painful thought refused to leave my mind. The river had not stopped because no one knew the truth. It had stopped because someone had spent decades making sure the truth stayed buried. The journal stayed hidden beneath my sleeping mat, but its words never left my mind. Asterisk, they knew, and chose silence instead. Asterisk. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dry riverbed, the frightened faces of the children, and the ancient symbol carved into the forgotten stones. The truth was somewhere inside our village, and I could no longer pretend not to hear it calling me. Before dawn, I quietly left my family's hut and walked toward the edge of the forest. Morning mist covered the ground, and the air felt strangely still. Even the insects seemed quieter than before. Nia's small hut stood beneath a giant baobab tree. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the roof, and smoke drifted slowly from a small fire outside. She looked up before I spoke. I knew you would return, she said softly. I reached into my bag and placed the old journal in front of her. I found this. Her eyes rested on the worn leather cover. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she gently closed her eyes. I prayed no one would ever have to read those pages, she whispered. Tell me the truth, I pleaded. No more riddles. No more warnings. She stared into the fire, her face filled with sorrow. Finally, she began to speak. Many years ago, before you were born, this village was very different. Her voice was calm, but every word carried pain. The river was not only our source of water, it was our greatest judge. I frowned. What do you mean? Our ancestors believed the river represented truth and balance. Whenever disputes arose, people gathered beside its waters and swore to speak honestly. No one dared lie before the river. She looked toward the distant riverbed. But greed is stronger than fear for some people. She took a slow breath. One season, sacred treasures disappeared from the village shrine. I listened without moving. The treasures were symbols of our unity. Their loss shocked everyone. Were they ever found? I asked. Nia slowly shook her head. No. Instead, powerful men blamed families who had done nothing wrong. My chest tightened. They needed someone to accuse, she continued. Someone too poor and too weak to defend themselves. I could barely breathe. Several innocent families were dragged before the council. They begged for mercy. They begged for a fair hearing. But fear had already poisoned the hearts of the leaders. I lowered my head. What happened to them? Nia's eyes filled with tears. They were condemned without proof. The words struck me like a heavy stone. The executions took place before sunrise. No trial. No justice. No chance to speak. Only silence remained between us. After several moments, she continued. When those families were gone, their homes stood empty. Their farms. Their cattle. Their land. All of it was quietly divided among a handful of powerful families. A cold wave passed through my body. So the accusations were never about the treasures. No, they were about wealth. They were about power. I stared at the fire as everything I believed about my village began to crumble. The treasures were never stolen by those families. Nia looked directly into my eyes. They were innocent. The words echoed through my mind. Innocent. Killed. Forgotten. And then erased from history. The river remembers every promise made beside its waters, Nia said quietly. When innocent blood touched the earth, balance was broken. The land itself carried the wound. And now, she looked toward the dry horizon. Now the wound has finally opened. I left her hut carrying a weight far greater than the journal. The truth was more terrible than I had imagined. Yet another question haunted me. Would anyone believe me? By afternoon, I asked Chief Jabri for a private meeting. He welcomed me into the council house. His face showed deep exhaustion. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. Kofi, he said kindly, I know these days have been difficult for everyone. I carefully placed the journal before him. I think I know why the river stopped. He opened the first few pages. As he continued reading, his expression slowly changed. When he reached the damaged section describing the innocent families, he closed the journal with a loud snap. This is impossible, he said firmly. It happened. No, the people who came before us would never allow such evil. They did. His voice became sharper. Enough. I stared at him in disbelief. Chief. I said enough. He stood from his chair. If people hear these stories now, panic will destroy what little peace remains. But hiding the truth already destroyed us. His eyes filled with anger. You are young. You do not understand the burden of leadership. I understand children are dying of thirst. He looked away. For the first time, I noticed something I had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of the drought. Fear of the truth. As I left the council house, 2 strong men blocked my path. One of them was a guard. The other worked for Bacco, the wealthy trader. You should stop asking questions, the guard warned. For your own good. I met his eyes. I only want the truth. The truth can be dangerous. They stepped aside, but the warning stayed with me. That evening, I hurried back to my home. My heart nearly stopped. Smoke rose into the dark sky. People gathered outside my hut. Someone shouted my name. Kofi. I ran forward. Flames climbed through the roof. Neighbors threw handfuls of dirt onto the fire, but it was too late. Everything inside was burning. I pushed toward the doorway. The journal. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders. You'll die. I struggled to break free, but the roof collapsed with a deafening crash. The fire swallowed everything. When the flames finally died hours later, only black ashes remained. I dropped to my knees. The journal, the only written record I had found, was gone. My mother quietly placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. I am sorry, I stared at the ashes. This had not been an accident. Someone wanted the evidence destroyed. The next morning, rumors spread through the village. Some claimed I had started the fire myself. Others whispered that I had insulted the ancestors. Friends stopped speaking to neighbors. Families locked their doors. No one knew who could be trusted anymore. The drought continued. The fear deepened. And as I looked across the broken faces of the people I had grown up with, I realized something even more frightening than the burning journal. The fire had not only destroyed evidence, it had burned away the last pieces of trust that still held our village together. The days that followed the fire were the hardest our village had ever known. Every sunrise brought less hope than the one before it. The little water that remained in our wells disappeared quickly. Families woke long before dawn, carrying empty clay pots, hoping to collect enough water before the wells turned to mud. Most mornings, they returned home with almost nothing. I stood near the largest well one morning and watched the rope scrape against dry stone. The bucket came back nearly empty. A woman reached for it with trembling hands. Before she could lift it, another woman grabbed the handle. "My children haven't had water since yesterday," she cried. "And mine have," the other shouted back. Within seconds, the two women were pulling at the bucket, each refusing to let go. Their husbands rushed forward. Voices grew louder. Someone shoved another man. A clay pot fell to the ground and shattered into dozens of pieces. The sound echoed through the silent village. Just weeks earlier, these families had shared meals together. Now they looked at one another like strangers. Fear had changed them. By afternoon, another problem appeared. The fields had almost completely dried out. The green crops that once covered the land had become brown and brittle. Farmers stood in silence as months of hard work crumbled beneath the hot sun. My mother gently touched one of our dying plants. "It never had a chance," she whispered. I had no words to comfort her. The river had fed our fields. Without it, the land itself seemed to be giving up. Soon hunger followed. Fishing had ended the day the river disappeared. The crops were failing. Wild animals had begun moving deeper into the forest, making hunting almost impossible. Children cried through the night with empty stomachs. Even the strongest men looked weaker with every passing day. While most families struggled, one part of the village remained strangely protected. The large food stores belonging to Bacco, the wealthy trader, stayed locked behind thick wooden gates. His guards stood outside day and night. No one was allowed inside. People whispered as they passed, "He has enough food for months. He has hidden barrels of clean water. But he refuses to share." No one could prove the rumors. Still, they spread quickly. One evening, a group of desperate villagers gathered outside Bacco's compound. They begged him to open his stores. He stepped outside surrounded by guards. "My supplies belong to my family," he said firmly. "If I give everything away today, none of us will survive tomorrow." His words only deepened the anger. Some people shouted at him. Others threw handfuls of dust toward his gates. The guards forced everyone back. I watched from a distance, feeling helpless. The village I loved was slowly tearing itself apart. Not because we hated one another, because fear had become stronger than kindness. The next morning, as I carried firewood home, several men blocked my path. One pointed directly at me. "This is your fault." I stared at him in confusion. "My fault? You filled everyone's heads with stories about old crimes. Ever since you started asking questions, nothing has been the same." Another man nodded. "You should have stayed quiet. If people believed this was simply a drought, we would still stand together." His words struck harder than I expected. Before I could answer, an older woman stepped forward from the crowd. "No," she said firmly. Her voice was weak but fearless. "He didn't stop the river. He only searched for the truth." Several others slowly joined her. "If there is a hidden sin," another villager said, "then we must face it. The truth cannot hurt us more than these lies already have." The crowd split into two groups. Some blamed me. Others defended me. For the first time in my life, our village was divided not by families or traditions, but by what people chose to believe. That night, I sat alone beside the dry riverbed. The moonlight covered the cracked earth in pale silver. I wondered if I had made everything worse. Maybe Chief Jabri had been right. Maybe exposing the past would only destroy what little hope remained. But then I remembered the innocent families. I remembered the journal. I remembered the fire. People willing to burn the truth would never protect the village. They were only protecting themselves. I knew I would find you here. I turned quickly. A young woman stood behind me. She carried a small cloth bag over one shoulder. Her face looked familiar, though I couldn't remember where I had seen her before. "My name is Amara," she said quietly. "My grandmother used to tell me stories your elders said were forbidden." I slowly stood. "What kind of stories?" She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "My family once lived in the abandoned part of the village." My heart skipped a beat. The abandoned huts. She nodded. "We are descendants of one of the families accused of stealing the sacred treasures." For several moments, neither of us spoke. "My grandmother always said our family was innocent," Amara continued. "But no one believed her. She kept everything she could save." She opened the cloth bag. Inside were old pieces of carved wood, faded cloth marked with the same ancient symbol I had seen on the stones, and several worn letters tied together with a leather string. "I hid these after people began asking questions about our family," she said. "I was afraid someone would destroy them." Carefully, I unfolded one of the letters. It contained names, dates, records of land ownership. Everything had been written many years before the innocent families disappeared. My pulse quickened. "This proves the land belonged to your family." "And others?" She nodded. "There is more." Over the next several hours, we compared her letters with everything I remembered from the burned journal. Piece by piece, the missing history began coming together. The lies were finally taking shape. As dawn approached, we looked toward the sleeping village. Amara broke the silence. "We can't keep hiding." I looked at the evidence spread between us. "No." I took a deep breath. The entire village deserves to know the truth. For the first time since the river had fallen silent, I no longer carried the burden alone. Together, we gathered every piece of forgotten evidence we could find, knowing that the next sunrise would bring the most dangerous day our village had ever faced. By sunrise, the news had spread through every corner of the village. Kofi and Amara had found proof. Some people believed it. Others called it another dangerous rumor. But no one stayed home. As the sun began to sink behind the distant hills, every path in the village led toward the great baobab tree. It was the oldest tree anyone had ever known, and for generations it had been the place where leaders made promises, disputes were settled, and important decisions shaped the future of the village. Tonight, it would witness something far greater. Men, women, and children gathered beneath its wide branches. Faces that had once been filled with laughter now carried fear, hunger, and uncertainty. The empty water pots lined the edge of the gathering. Thin children leaned against their mothers. Even the elders looked weaker than before. Chief Jabri stood at the center of the circle. His shoulders seemed heavier than they had only a few days earlier. When he looked at the crowd, he saw a village standing on the edge of collapse. He raised his hand. "We are here because the truth can no longer remain hidden." A quiet murmur passed through the crowd. Then he turned toward me. "Kofi," he said softly, "show us what you have found." Every eye rested on me. For a moment, my legs refused to move. I remembered the burned journal, the threats, the accusations, the friends who no longer trusted me. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away. But then I saw the children sitting beside the empty wells. I remembered the innocent families who had never been given a chance to speak. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the center of the gathering. Amara stood beside me. She carefully placed the bundle of old letters, carved wooden symbols, faded cloth, and land records onto a woven mat. The village fell completely silent. I picked up the oldest letter. This belonged to one of the families who disappeared many years ago. People leaned closer. I explained how Amara's family had protected these records for decades. I showed the old land documents that proved several families had owned farms long before they were accused of stealing the sacred treasures. One by one, I placed each piece of evidence before the crowd. The carved symbol matched the markings hidden inside the abandoned huts. The faded cloth carried the same ancient sign carved into the sacred stones. Every piece connected to another. Slowly, the forgotten story came back to life. Then Amara spoke. My grandmother told me that our family begged for a fair hearing. Her voice trembled. They were called thieves before anyone searched for the missing treasures. She looked across the crowd. They were innocent. Many people lowered their heads. Others wiped tears from their eyes. An elderly man slowly pushed himself to his feet. His name was Elder Juma. His hand shook as he leaned on his walking stick. "I remember," he whispered. The crowd turned toward him. I was only a young man. I watched those families being taken away. His voice cracked. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell everyone they deserved justice. He closed his eyes. But I was afraid. A heavy silence followed. I remained silent. Tears rolled down his face. I have carried that shame every day of my life. His confession opened a door that had remained locked for decades. Another elderly woman stepped forward. I remember the children crying. A gray-haired hunter lowered his head. I knew the accusations were false. I said nothing. One after another, elderly villagers confessed the same painful truth. None of them had stolen the sacred treasures, but many had watched innocent people suffer because they were too frightened to stand against powerful men. The weight of those words settled over the gathering. Chief Jabri slowly walked toward the evidence. His eyes rested on the old land records. Then he looked at the faces surrounding him. "My father was one of the council elders," he said quietly. "So was my grandfather." His voice grew weaker. "They always told me our village had been built on honor." He paused. I never questioned their stories. He looked toward Amara. I never questioned why some families disappeared. Tears filled his eyes. If these records are true. He struggled to finish the sentence. Then the leaders who came before us committed terrible crimes. The crowd gasped. No one had expected those words from the chief himself. He bowed his head. And by protecting their silence. I also became part of that lie. His confession broke something inside the gathering. Members of several respected families began weeping openly. Some realized their wealth had come from land taken from innocent people. Others looked at Amara with faces full of guilt. Parents held their children tightly. Grandchildren looked toward their grandparents with painful questions in their eyes. Descendants of the accused families stood only a few steps away from descendants of those who had benefited from their suffering. No one knew what to say. The pain belonged to everyone now. One young man stepped forward, anger burning in his eyes. "My grandfather was murdered." He pointed toward another family. "And your family lived in his house." The accused man's voice trembled. "I did not know." "But your family did." Another argument threatened to begin. Old wounds had finally opened. Forgiveness felt impossible. I looked around the circle and realized that truth alone did not erase pain. It only revealed it. Just then, the wind suddenly changed. A powerful gust swept across the village. Dust rose into the air. The branches of the great baobab tree bent and creaked. People looked toward the sky. It was completely clear. Not a single cloud could be seen. Then, without warning, a loud roll of thunder echoed across the land. Children screamed. Several villagers fell to their knees. Another crash of thunder shook the ground beneath our feet. The air itself seemed alive. Every face turned toward the empty river. No one spoke. No one moved. With the truth finally laid bare before the entire village, we all waited in breathless silence, wondering whether confession alone would be enough to heal a wound that had poisoned the land for generations. The village did not sleep that night. After the confessions beneath the great baobab tree, no one returned to life as it had been before. Small fires burned outside many homes as families sat together in silence. Some cried openly. Others prayed. Many simply stared into the darkness, wondering whether the truth had come too late. I sat beside my mother until the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Neither of us spoke. There were no words that could carry the weight of everything we had learned. When the sky slowly turned from black to pale gold, the sound of a drum echoed across the village. Chief Jabri had called everyone to the river. Once again, every path filled with people. But this time, no one argued. No one accused another. They walked quietly, carrying heavy hearts instead of empty water pots. When we reached the dry riverbed, the silence felt even deeper than before. The cracked earth stretched before us exactly as it had for days. There was no water, no movement, no sign that anything had changed. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Children looked at their parents with frightened eyes. Some villagers lowered their heads. An old man whispered, "Perhaps the ancestors have already judged us." A woman wiped away her tears. We confessed. We admitted our sins. Why is the river still silent? Hope began to fade once more. I looked across the dry riverbed and felt disappointment pressing against my heart. Had we come too late? Had the wound become too deep to heal? Then I remembered something Nia had told me. The river remembers every promise made beside its waters. A confession was only the beginning. Promises had to be followed by actions. I stepped forward. "We have spoken the truth," I said, my voice carrying across the silent crowd. But truth without justice is only another promise left unfinished. People slowly lifted their heads. I looked toward Chief Jabri. The innocent families were never given honor. They were never remembered. The land taken from them still belongs to others. My words hung in the morning air. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Chief Jabri walked into the center of the gathering. He removed the carved staff that marked him as chief and placed it gently on the ground. His voice trembled. "Kofi is right." He turned toward the descendants of the innocent families. "Today, we begin repairing what our ancestors destroyed." One by one, the leaders of the village stepped forward. The wealthy trader, Bako, stood silently for several moments before lowering his head. "My grandfather received land that was never ours," he admitted. "I return it today." Gasps spread through the crowd. Other families followed. They handed over old deeds, farming tools, and pieces of land that had been passed down through generations. No one was forced. They chose to do it. Not because it erased the past, but because it was the first step toward making things right. Amara stood beside me, tears filling her eyes. "My grandmother prayed for this day," she whispered. "I only wish she had lived to see it." Soon, the villagers carried large stones to the edge of the riverbed. Each stone was placed carefully into the ground. The names of the innocent families were carved into them, one by one. No longer forgotten. No longer hidden. Children gathered flowers from the few green plants that still survived. They laid them gently beside the memorial stones. The elders bowed their heads. Prayers filled the quiet air. Not prayers asking for miracles, but prayers asking for forgiveness. As the ceremony came to an end, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman slowly walked toward Amara. She was the daughter of one of the men who had served on the old council. For years, their families had never spoken. With trembling hands, the old woman reached for Amara. "I cannot change what my father did," she said through tears. "But I ask you to forgive what hatred has carried for so many years." Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and embraced her. The two women wept together. Soon, others followed. Families separated by generations of pain embraced one another. Some apologized. Some forgave. Some simply cried together because words were no longer enough. The entire village stood united in grief. And then, a small sound broke the silence. It was so soft that I almost thought I had imagined it. Drip, drip, drip. I turned toward the riverbed. A tiny stream of water slipped between two cracked stones. Someone pointed. "Look." The trickle grew stronger. Another stream appeared farther upstream. Then another. The dry earth began to darken as fresh water spread across the cracked ground. Children laughed through their tears. The elders fell to their knees. People reached for one another, unable to believe what they were seeing. The streams joined together. Slowly, steadily, the river began to flow once more, not with the roaring strength it once had, but with the gentle heartbeat of new life. Fish splashed in the shallow water as if they had never left. Birds circled above the village before returning to the trees. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh water across the land. No one shouted with wild celebration. Instead, tears flowed more freely than words. We cried for those who had been forgotten. We cried for the years that had been stolen. We cried because hope had returned when we least expected it. As I knelt beside the flowing water and placed my hand into the cool current, I finally understood what the river had been waiting for. It had never asked for perfect people. It had asked for honest hearts. Only after truth was spoken, justice began, and forgiveness found its place could the miracle we longed for finally begin. Several months passed after the day the river returned. At first, its waters flowed gently, as though the land itself was healing from an old wound. Then, with each passing week, the current grew stronger. The clear water once again rushed over the smooth stones, filling the air with the familiar sound I had missed every morning. The river had found its voice again. And so had our village. When I walked along the river bank now, I no longer saw cracked earth or abandoned boats. Fishermen pushed their canoes into the water before sunrise, smiling as they cast their nets. Children laughed as they chased one another along the shore. Women filled their clay pots with fresh water, their faces no longer marked by fear. The river had become more than a source of life once again. It had become a reminder that truth cannot stay buried forever. Our fields slowly turned green again. The first small shoots appeared only days after the river returned. Soon, rows of healthy crops stretched across the land, waving gently in the warm breeze. The harvest that year was not the largest our village had ever seen, but it was the most meaningful. Every basket of grain reminded us how close we had come to losing everything. Fishing also returned. One morning, I helped pull a heavy net from the river. It shimmered with silver fish, and everyone standing on the shore cheered. Months earlier, those same waters had been empty. Now they were full of life again. The greatest changes, however, were not in the river. They were in the people. After many long meetings, the village chose new leaders. For the first time in anyone's memory, wealth was not the reason someone was trusted. The people chose men and women known for honesty, kindness, and courage. Chief Jabri stepped down from his position with humility. "I cannot erase the mistakes of the past," he told the village, "but I can help build a better future." No one mocked him. His willingness to admit the truth had earned him a different kind of respect. He became one of the village's most trusted advisors, helping the new council guide our community with fairness instead of pride. Bacco, the wealthy trader, also changed. He reopened his storehouses and worked beside ordinary farmers during the planting season. Many people found it difficult to forgive him at first. Trust does not return overnight. It grows slowly, just like a young tree. Bacco understood that. Instead of asking people to forget the past, he spent each day trying to earn their trust through his actions. Amara became one of the village's most respected voices. She helped record the true history of our people so that no one could ever rewrite it again. Together, the elders, teachers, and families gathered every child beneath the great baobab tree. There, they told the complete story. Not just the victories, not just the celebrations, but also the mistakes. They spoke about the innocent families who had suffered. They spoke about fear. They spoke about silence. And they spoke about the courage it took to face the truth. Some children cried. Others asked difficult questions. The elders answered every one of them honestly. No village becomes stronger by hiding its scars, Baba Omari told them. We become stronger by learning from them. When the next day of gratitude arrived, the celebration felt different. The drums still echoed across the village. The dancers still filled the open fields with color. The food was shared freely among every family. But before the music began, everyone gathered beside the memorial stones near the river. Fresh flowers rested beside every name. For several quiet moments, no one spoke. Then Chief Jabri stepped forward. "We do not honor the river because it gives us water," he said. "We honor it because it reminds us to live with truth." The entire village bowed their heads. It was no longer a festival built on superstition or fear. It had become a promise. A promise that justice would never again be traded for comfort. A promise that no family would ever be forgotten. A promise that every voice deserved to be heard. As for me, I often returned to the same place where I had first noticed the strange silence before the river disappeared. I would sit on the smooth stones and watch the current flow past my feet. Sometimes I thought about how close we had come to destroying ourselves. It was never the drought alone that nearly ended our village. It was our silence. The river had not stopped because nature had abandoned us. It had stopped because we had abandoned the truth. Only when we faced our past with honest hearts did healing begin. Looking across the water now, I saw children playing where cracked earth had once stretched across the land. I saw families who had once been enemies working side by side in the fields. I saw hope growing stronger with every new season. The river flowed peacefully beneath the golden evening sun, carrying away the pain of yesterday while giving life to tomorrow. Its gentle current whispered a lesson our village would never forget. Greed may divide people. Fear may silence them. Lies may survive for many years. But truth has a strength greater than all of them. When people choose honesty over pride, forgiveness over hatred, and unity over fear, even the deepest wounds can heal. And just as the river found its way back to us, hope will always find its way back to those who have the courage to do what is right. From that day forward, whenever the river sang through our village, every heart understood its message. Nature remembers. Truth endures. Forgiveness heals. And together, they can restore what greed once tried to destroy.